And we are back. Okay, so before the break, we went through the additional changes that we need to make. So let's see if we can get some of that stuff done. Now, I did prepare those icons for the purpose of putting them on the UI so we can properly check or display the current status of the server itself. Before we can do that, though, it might be beneficial to further update the server profile with some kind of status flag. Um, so we will go and do that. There. Since we don't particularly need that status flag to be of any huge size, we basically just need 4 different values for it. We'll just make it a byte. No point in spending memory that we don't really need. So we'll put status in there, and then we will default status to be 0. There we go. For the 4 icons that I prepared, we have an one that indicates that it's stopped. We have one that indicates that it's loading up. We have one that indicates that it's currently running, and we have one that indicates that it's shutting down. So, for the sake of getting these icons into our program, we are going to embed them as a resource. So we'll grab a copy of them, and then we'll go back here, Minecraft Server Launcher, create a folder called Resources, and we'll do icons here, and then stuff them in here. Okay, so action stop red. Yeah. We will rename this to stopped. We will rename this one to running. We will rename this one to starting, and we'll rename this one to stopping. There we go. The order doesn't really matter. Or we'll put them in there. We will be referencing these by name, and we'll cache them because it does take a little bit of time to load them from the assembly every time we need them. So for the sake of expedience and a little better performance while drawing the UI, we'll grab them during load up and then stuff them in variables that we can just simply through a switch statement draw on the UI surface when we need to show them. But before we can do that, we kind of need to go to the properties for the project, because we need to access the embedded resources. So we'll add an existing file, and then we will go grab them. Now, the reason I put them in a folder called resources is so that I can keep the files along with the rest of the project, or keep the icons alongside with the rest of the project files. So it's just a force of habit that I put them here. There we go, that's one of them. Add another one, starting, and another one, stopped, and another one, stopping. There we go. That's how easy it is to embed resources. The difficult part comes when we want to access them and make use of them. Now, doing embedded resource stuff is not something that I do every single day, so I tend to forget how to do it. Because of that, I've saved a little code snippet within my development structure here, So I'll fetch this. Um, it does make use of reflection because I need to access the assembly of the project um, to be able to fetch that one specific image. And this one basically goes through reflection and makes use of the resource manager to find the resource and then return it to us, and in doing so we'll convert it to a bitmap right away. So to do this stuff we kind of need to add it in somewhere. Let's see if we can do some collapsing here. Internal helper methods. So this would be the perfect place to put it. Method get resource bitmap by name, and this should actually be further down because R comes after M, so it should be here. There we go. And then we'll grab a copy of it like so. And we now have a method by which we can fetch those embedded resources by simply specifying the name of it. Okay, so far so good. As I mentioned, for the sake of a little bit of performance increase when redrawing the UI, I intend to store those images in local variables that we can then dispose of when the application stops. So let's go in the rendering stuff on form. We kind of need to declare some variables for them, stuff them in here, and do some preloading of them. So we'll go down here and create a couple of variables. Status icon stopped. Status icon starting. And one for status icon running, and the final one, status icon stopping. There we go. Now we have those, and then we'll do a initialize status icons, and we will simply just go status icon stopped, get resource bitmap by name. This would then be stopped as it is shown here. And the same goes for starting, get resource by name, starting, status icon running, and finally stopping. There we go. Basically this just copies the images from the resource bag into variables we can access directly. It's a little faster than having to go through the resource bag every time we need to access those images, so it's just to reduce the lag, so to speak, when rendering the UI surface. Okay, so we do have a few things that we need to look into in terms of updating the status of each individual server instance. And to do that, we kind of need to grab a hold of the different events. So Uh, since this event triggers the instant that we instruct the server to start up, we need to figure out where or which instance we're currently messing with, so we can correctly update the server profile in the configuration. Since we're not saving those specific things, it doesn't make a huge difference, but we'll put it in there anyway. To do that, though, we need to find the server profile index. So we'll do server profile index, get server profile index based on the server host ID. If this one is greater than -1, that means we found it, and then we can update the profile in the config object. So we'll do that. Server profiles, which would then be the server profile index, and then we'll set the status to 1, indicating starting. There we go. And then we need to update it again, or write the changes back, actually. Config profiles server profile index equals that one profile. There we go. Now the reason for doing this is because we kind of need to make sure that we draw the right icon showing the status of the server. So this should be fine. Now this is something that we will need to do quite a few times, because we have the server starting event, we have the server started event, we have the server shutting down event, and we also have the server stopped event. So that's a total of 4 times that we need to do that kind of update. So instead of going through and basically doing a copy paste of this code every time, we will do a quick method up here that does that updating for us. Method update server status. Like so. And this needs to be a new status. Then we will grab this code from here, stuff it up here, and we also need to specify the host ID, so we'll grab that. There we go. And instead of this hard-coded to 1, we'll use the variable, of course. And just for the sake of documentation, in here we will put a quick status. 0 indicates stopped, 1 indicates starting up, 2 indicates running, 3 indicates stopping, shutting down. There we go. We could do this, add an enum for it if we really wanted to. Personal preference, I guess. Yeah. Actually, why don't we do that? Let's see. We'll add an enum here. Server status. And then we will do stopped equals 0. Starting equals 1. Running equals 2. And stopping equals 3. There we go. Okay, then we will change this to become an enum instead, and then cast this as a byte, since we declared it as a byte, and we can now specify an enum instead. So we don't have to remember the actual values. Instead, we can do update server status, pass the host ID, and then select which one we want. And in this case, it would be starting, so we'll put that on. And this is basically what we need to do for server started as well. So we'll update that. Update server status, server host ID, and here we are now running. And further down, we have server shutting down, which would of course be the update server status, server host ID, and this would then be stopping. And finally, server stopped, update server status, server host ID, and it's now stopped. There we go. Now, when a server profile is created, the default setting of the status is 0. 0 will indicate that it is stopped. So that's something that we need to keep in mind when rendering stuff on the form. So let's go have a look at our custom UI draw stuff, which is down here. Render some text, yeah, we'll do that there. We'll add in render the current server status icon. So for this we are looping through the config. So here we will do a switch on the current profile, and I believe it's P, and we need the status. So if it's 0, then it's stopped. If it's 1, then it is starting. If it's 2, then it is running. And if it is 3, it is stopping, like so. Next up, we need to figure out exactly where we want to draw it. So let's go see if we can figure out exactly how big this thing is. As far as I remember, we did set an actual size to it, which is the server profile maximum width. So if we want to right align this icon to say the, I don't know, lower right hand corner of the profile display, then we need to do a little bit of calculation to get the icon drawn there. Each of these icons are, let's see where they are here, they are 16 by 16 pixels, so we need to subtract those sizes. Welcome to the stream, Trintace. An easy game. Do you have any kind of game in mind? If you don't have an actual idea for an easy game, then I would probably suggest figuring that out first. The very simplest type of game that you can create as a learning project would be something like tic-tac-toe. It's a simple two-player hot seat game, and it'll teach you a little bit about game mechanics in terms of how to determine when there's a winner. Going into details about actual game development as such is something that I will do as part of the next project I will be doing on stream. However, the project I have in mind is meant for the role-playing games style, so it's a little more involved. but in terms of understanding the basics of game development, I would highly recommend going with something like tic-tac-toe to begin with, and then take a look at the game called Go. Um, it is by far one of the most complex games in the world, more complex than chess is. However, it is an excellent learning platform in terms of understanding game mechanics and how to build game mechanics. So those two games are, in my opinion, probably the best starting points, because you can gradually increase the complexity of what your code is capable of doing versus what the game rules are. If you're thinking about stuff like creating a first-person shooter, then you kind of need to understand the basics of geometry and how to calculate line of sight and stuff like that, so you can correctly aim at a target somewhere, and that takes a lot of geometry to figure out. But it all depends on what kind of game project you have in mind. I would be happy to discuss it after the stream, because I could easily spend an entire day talking about this. So if you want to stick around, we can have a talk afterwards. Okay, positioning. Bum, 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 bum. Let's see. We actually do have a X and Y position being calculated. Those would be the upper left-hand corner of the profile view, which would be pretty much where the corner of the server icon is currently located. So we can use those those positions to calculate where to put the status icon. Since we already have a couple of constants defining the size of it, it shouldn't be all that big of an issue calculating where to put them. Before we actually do implement rendering of these four status icons, we kind of need to make sure that they also get properly initialized. So that is something that we should do. Let's see, where is it? The constructor. Let's fetch it here. And grab the initialize status icons. That way they are available to us whenever we need them. Okay. Next up, we need to draw them, and part of doing that is, of course, using the graphics object and basically doing the same as is done right here, except we need to recalculate the X and Y position. So for the stopped icon, we need to show the one accompanying it. So graphics.draw image status icon stopped. Then this would be the X position plus the maximum width minus the width of this particular icon. So we will do those calculations. Server profile maximum width minus the status icon stopped width, and we also need to specify the Y position, and since we have more or less hardwired the profile height to be 64, it's basically just Y plus 64 minus the height of the status icon. So Y plus the height 64 minus the height of status icon stopped, and that should be it. Now, for the sake of preventing some weird crashes, because the form might be drawn before all of the initialization has been completed, we'll do a quick safety check to ensure that the icon has actually been instantiated, like so. And for the sake of readability, we'll divide these up so we can more easily see them. There we go. And this is basically what we need to do for the other three cases as well. So to save a little bit of typing, we'll just change these. This would be the starting icon, arting, and arting, and arting. There we go. The same for running. Running and running here. And finally running here. There we go. And the stopping. There we go. And last one. Nice. Let's see what happens. Crash and burn? Nope. We now have a nice red icon indicating that these two servers are stopped. And if we select one of them and try to start it, it should pop up with a arrow at some point, which it doesn't. And the reason that it doesn't is because we have yet to indicate to the UI that we need to update it. Now that I moved the mouse pointer across it, it did the update as it was supposed to, which is why it switched to the play icon. We'll stop it and then fix this little oversight. Luckily, it's not all that difficult forcing that update, because up here in our helper methods, we have this one. And if we are a little bit smart about this, we actually do a quick check on what the current status is to see if we actually have to update it. So, if this one, profiles, server profile index dot status does not equal the new status that we are attempting to assign to it, then we will do the actual updating of it. And the last thing that needs to be done is to force a redraw of the entire UI. So to do that, we will simply invalidate the current contents, and that forces a redraw. And these should now properly and correctly update those status icons as the server starts up. So, start, and the blue up arrow is now on it. And in a minute, the green play. There we go. Nice and sweet. They are now updating correctly as they should. And it should also react the same way when we shut it down. So let's see if the blue down arrow shows up. Poof, there it is, and it stopped. Nice. Pretty cool. I love building custom UIs. You can always put some cool effect in there. Okay, so we now have proper status icons implemented. Very nice. We still have a few things that are kind of missing on the current profile show of each server. Now, we did put the custom title in there. We can change this easy if we want to. We'll rename this to Vanilla Heaven. Accept, and it updates immediately. So that's in there already. We may want to change the color of it, but whatevs. one thing that we definitely want to do now that we've got the status icon implemented, we want to see if we can put up a player count and possibly throw in the message of the day and which port this particular server runs on. So we can see if we can get away with adding that kind of information. Now, again, in terms of performance, it is always faster to grab the contents of a variable than it is attempting to load a value from some source somewhere. That could be from disk or from, say, the embedded resource bag, all the stuff in there. It does take a little bit of time because some of it involves disk access, and any kind of disk access is always, by definition, slow. So caching things that need to be updated fast is a way to help keep the performance up. So we'll see if we can add in some of these pieces of information. Since we already have a nice profile that contains most of this stuff, it should be fairly easy for us to synchronize the changes. So, what do we need? We need the player count and the maximum number of players. We also need the message of the day and the port number. So we'll add those to this. Player count, and we'll add max players. We'll add the port number, and finally we'll add the message of the day. There we go. And now it's complaining that these are not initialized, so we'll go put those in. Player count equals 0. Player max equals 0. Port equals 0, and we'll set this to just be empty. There we go. Okay, problem solved. All right. These are items that we need to synchronize. And to do that, we kind of need to hook into all the different places where some of this information might be either loaded or in some way changed. So whenever a new server profile is added, or whenever it is edited, we haven't implemented an option to remove just yet, but whenever a profile is removed, all of this needs to be synchronized correctly. So let's get rid of this, and this we probably don't need either. All right. See, we do have one method that handles at least some of it, which is the check server profiles method. It does a check on disk to see if there are any server icons alongside with the actual server itself. It also assigns the unique ID for each server instance, so we can recognize them and synchronize correctly. So we might as well add in those extra bits of information as part of the check server profile run, since it loops through all of them. So let's see if we can do something about that. This one checks to see if the jar is there. So next up we need to see if we can get away with loading up the server properties file, because we need to fetch the MOTD, we need to fetch the configured port number, and we need to fetch the maximum player count. So for that purpose, we shall do an ini file and call it server properties. and create a new instance of this, and it allows us to specify the file path name and set virtual grouping for it, which is definitely something that's going to help us. So let's see, we can fetch the path from here. We've already set it up so that the path will always have a trailing backslash, which means we can just add in server properties here, and then we need to specify that it has to use virtual grouping because the server properties file doesn't contain a group. And then from here we can fetch those individual values that we need to store, and for that purpose we definitely need another instance of the fix int. So instead of having to recreate that, we'll go and fetch it. We should have it in here somewhere. Right here, for example. So let's grab this and stuff it over here. EFG, so that will be right there. The reason we need this is so we can convert the string-based value from the ini file into a numeric value that we can assign to our actual profile. Alright, so since we may need this, I think I'm gonna move this up here, and then let's see, icon loaded, we can move that up there as well, then we can reuse it. And this one is the one that determines whether it has to be written back. So we'll put that down here, and actually I think we'll get rid of this because we are writing the settings to it anyways, so we'll just force an update of it. Okay, so profile dot port. No, actually we'll start with the max players. We'll grab that one. So fix int server properties get value. Get value, and that would then be the load this, that's fine. Max players, which is right there. We also need to set the port number, so we'll grab that. Whoops. Server properties get value, which would be server port. There we go. And finally the MOTD, which would be MOTD, and there we go. Alright. Since we removed that variable, we can get rid of it. There we go. This should now add in the configured maximum number of players, whichever port number has been configured for the server itself, as well as the MOTD information that's stored in the server properties file, which will then enable us to output those on the UI during a render phase. So let's see if we can get that done. That's down in the rendering stuff, which is right here, and past the icons. Next up, render some text. Absolutely. Okay, so it would be kind of neat if we could align the player information to say the top right hand corner of each profile. In order to do that, we kind of need to figure out exactly how big that particular text will be. So for the sake of putting that information up there, we will do a local string here, player info, and assign it the player count. And of course we need to convert that to a string because we're putting it into a string, and then we'll add a slash and then finish it off with the configured max player count. There we go. Okay, so how do we figure out how big this thing is going to be? Well, the graphics object has an option that allows us to measure how big a string actually is. For the sake of doing the players, we'll create another font, player font. Nah, actually we'll call it misc font, and then do a copy of whatever the form has been configured to, and then do this at let's say 10.5 points, and let's do it regular. There we go. Okay, then we'll use this to render all the extra additional text. Okay, so in order to measure how big a string would be if it were drawn, we need to define a size. So let's measure string. This would then be the player info text that we want to put up there, and then we need to specify the font that we intend to use. So this should provide us with a width and a height that this text would occupy, and that then allows us to calculate the position in a similar fashion as we did on the status icons. In this case, however, we want to top align it, so the Y position we can basically just leave as is because text is drawn from top to bottom. So the only thing that we need to recalculate is the X position. Okay, so let's see if we can actually draw this thing. Render current player count max player count. Alright, this would then be a drawstring, and for this we want to dump in the player info. We want to use the misc font. We'll do a, I don't know, we'll just do a white, I think. Start white, not wheat, white, there we go. And then we need to specify a point. Alternatively, we can just specify the X and Y position as we did before. So let's just do that. This would then be the X position plus the server profile maximum width minus the size width, and then the at the Y position. And this should now take care of rendering the current number of online players as well as the maximum that we fetched from the server properties file. Right. That's not the one I wanted. This is the one I wanted. That takes care of this one. So currently we have the icon, we have the custom name for it, and the players are positioned up here, and the current status is positioned down there. That's represented by the icons instead. So we could put in the MOTD as well as the port information. So we'll add that next. Let's see if we can get the color value for this, which is 224, 224, 224. So that's fairly straightforward. Render the configured port number. Um, since we're using the exact same font, we can, for the most part, assume that the height will be somewhat equal to what we already measured. So we'll just reuse that, and then for the sake of just in case, we'll add one to the height. So in this case, we need to draw a text that says port plus the current config profile, the current profile port, convert that to a string. We want to use the MISC font. We'll do a new solid brush, creates a new brush, and then we'll specify a specific color. In this case, we'll use the 224, 224, 224. There we go. And then we need to specify where to render it. And for the sake of being able to read this a little easier, I'll split these up like so. And then here we need to specify the X position. Now we don't want to draw right at the X position itself, because that's where the server icon is. So we definitely need to go past the width of the server icon, and it would be nice if we could at least somewhat align it to where the custom name is set. So let's have a look at where that actually is. This would be render some text. First, the custom profile name, which uses the name font and the cornflower blue. And this is the X position and the Y position right there. So these are more or less the same. We'll grab this, since we want to try to align the port information with the custom name that we've given the profile. So we'll put that in there, like so. And then we need to also specify the Y position. Since we want it bottom aligned according to the icon, we need to add the icon height minus the size of the text itself. We will, for the time being, just assume that it's pretty much the same, but we'll add one to it just in case. And this should now render the text port followed by the port number right next to the icon at the bottom of it. So let's see what happens. Nice, there we go. That's pretty neat. Last thing we need to put in here is the MOTD. So let's see if we can put that in there. Render the MOTD. And the MOTD is basically just a string as is. However, we do have a slight issue in terms of where to place it. And yes, I do know that it looks a little bit offset. So we may want to add one or two to the X position to get them to line up a little better. But we'll see if we can, at least to some extent, maybe middle align the MOTD. Alternatively, we can place it right underneath the title. We actually might want to do that. Yeah, let's do that. So we'll offset this one a little bit. Let's add 2 pixels to it. That should be fine. Okay, so this is the custom profile name. We'll use the same brush as here. So for the moment, let's just grab a copy of this and stuff it up here. Render the MOTD. There we go. And instead of grabbing the port, we will of course grab the MOTD. There we go. The misc font. We need that brush. We need this position, but we do need a different height. So how do we accomplish this? Since we know that we have a fixed height of 64 pixels, we need to be within that. We don't exactly know how big the title font is, so we can grab that in a similar fashion as we did down here, and simply measure it. So instead of doing this, we'll move this one up here and start by doing the measure string, if I could spell. Grab the config profiles name using the name font, and that then grants us the height of the custom name for it, which should add up to us just specifying y plus size.height, and that should then render the MOTD right underneath the custom name. So let's see. Here we go. Now it starts looking a little better. Now we actually have usable information. The last thing that I wanted to do today is to see if we can implement something that will update the current player count whenever a player joins in, and again whenever a player leaves. And luckily we have a couple of events that can help us do exactly that. So to update those particular things, we may want to add in a method for that kind of updating. So in a similar fashion to the server status, we will simply go through and check which one it is, and then perform the update if it is needed. So update player count private, and this would then be the server host ID followed by the current player count. Now the current player count, is that something that we can actually access? Let's see. That would be part of the server host stuff. It has a nice list called online players. So the quick and easy way of updating this is simply just passing the current player count of that server host instance to this method, and then that takes care of updating the currently online players. Just like we did before in the server status, we will do a quick check to see if we actually need to update it, and then only perform this update if the numbers have changed. Again, this is to prevent forcing a redraw of the entire UI 200 times a second. So that's pretty much it. Same as before, we need to find the server profile index. So let's see if we can find that one. That would mean calling the get server profile index and passing it the host ID. If we actually did find one, then we can do some stuff. So we'll check if the current player count is different from the player count passed. If server profile index dot player count is different from whatever player count was passed here, then we'll do the update. And the update is pretty much the same thing as here, except it's a different property. Stuff that in here. This would be the player count equals the count that was passed, and then pass it back again and force an update of the UI. Put that down here too. There we go. Okay, so where do we need to place a call for this one? We need to do that in the player joined and player parted events, which are right down here somewhere. Player joined is right here. So we will do the update player count, except here we actually need to work out which host profile this is so we can properly update the count. So why don't we just remove the argument player count and have the method do it for us. That way we don't only need to pass the host ID to it to have it properly update. And this is what we need to do down here as well. When a player joins, the count increments. When a player leaves, this count decrements. So let's go up here and update this. There we go. We managed to find the server profile, so now let's see if we can find the host profile. So host index equals get server host index for the same ID. If this is greater than server host index is derp greater than -1, then we did find it, and then we can properly update these. Just for the sake of less convoluted stuff down here, we'll go this way and fetch the online players count, and then we can move this up here. Boom. There we go. So what does this code actually do? We know that we get a server host ID. So first we see if we can find a server profile that matches. If we can, then we look see if we can find a server host instance that matches. If we do, then we fetch the current online players count, check it up against the current count that's stored in the server profile. If they differ in some way, we update the information and then we force an update of the UI. The reason for doing that is because we need the text that's being rendered on the UI to properly update whenever a player joins or leaves. So let's see if this actually works. And to do that, I need to fire up Minecraft. So I'll fetch clean 112. Server is up and running and the icon is correctly displaying it. And the game is loading up. When it finishes at some point, and shut up. There we go. And let's join in and see what happens to the player count up here. It went up to 1, just as we expected. So it now shows that Vanilla Heaven has 1 player out of 10 possible. And we'll disconnect from here and see if it goes down. Boom. Awesome. All of it seems to be working, so we're good. Let's get this one shut down. Nice. That's not bad for a day's work. And this pretty much concludes what I had on my to-do list for today. So I think we will call it a day and see what kind of trouble we can get ourselves into next week. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining in today. The chat is still open for comments, feedback, suggestions, questions. Please feel free to let loose in the chat, and we'll take it from there. Thank you very much for joining.